Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome. Very excited today about the webinar that we have in store for you. My name is Derek Mankey. I am a Global Vice President of Threat Intelligence with Fortinet and FortiGuard Labs. Joining me today on the webinar is Douglas Santos, who's our Director of Advanced Threat Intelligence. How are you doing, Doug?
I'm pretty good, man. It's the sun's shining in Vancouver and good times ahead.
Yes. It's a rare occurrence, but
yeah,
you know, we're always trying to move the needle in the industry, and I know you and I work on this every day. But so you know, we speak and breathe this language, but it's great to be able to share an update of what we're doing with our partnerships, and specifically with MITRE Ingenuity. That's what this webinar is about. So we're going to be talking about what we're doing with the Center for Threat-Informed Defense. What is threat-informed defense? Getting into the meat of it with the projects that Douglas will walk you through, and I'll stage and sort of walk through what this is all about, what we've been up to for the last 2 years with the game of threat-informed defense, with projects, industry movements, how we're really strategically collaborating as a resource partner with MITRE to achieve this. So before we get into that, I'd like to open this up actually with a poll to the audience, because a lot of this might be a new concept, which is of course fine to you. But I'd like to ask the question, we'll spend about a minute here. Have you heard of this phrase before, threat-informed defense? And if you have you implemented it? Is it on your radar, maybe for FY24? In an ideal world, are you already on top of this and operationalizing this as well too? So we'll leave the poll open for about a minute, and keep in mind, you know, when we talk about threat-informed defense, we're looking at operationalizing this, of course, not just a framework like MITRE ATT&CK, which a lot of the audience may be familiar with. Of course, it's implemented worldwide, but really talking about you know, understanding the threat, operationalizing that to a strategic defense, right? And so we'll talk more about the concept as we go through. Looks like we have a lot of submissions. I'll just leave this open for another 20 seconds or so. Okay, great. And so just continuing on that, if you have started using threat-informed defense in any way, what's been your experience? Has it been easy to implement if you have the right tools, processes in place, or is this just a esoteric concept right now? In other words, is it confusing, complex, or is it hard to get, you know, support for this in terms of tooling? But when you do get it right, you're finding documentation, you're finding the right open source tools, i.e. on GitHub and things like that, or FortiGuard Labs to help get you started. So we'll leave this open, and then I'll jump into all the details what we're doing with MITRE as well. And you know, just reflecting on my point of view with this, Doug, I know you know, from our experience when we started with threat-informed defense, like anything, right? When it's new in the industry, there is no easy button, I would say, you know, from my point of view. But again, this is about community, right? This is about documentation tooling. There is a lot out there, so we'll be talking about, you know, guiding you to that in the webinar today too, really showing how this can be adopted. And, you know, again, just reflecting from our point of view, obviously being at the forefront of this, when you do have the tooling in place, it actually becomes, it's a culture shift, isn't it, Doug?
I think so. Yeah. Specifically because, you know, before this term threat-informed defense was coined, all we did was basically run around our environments looking for hashes and URLs and domain IPs, right? So it was kind of looking for the needle in the haystack, and threat-informed defense shift this a little bit, right? So I think it's a very powerful tool if one can start to operationalize and help you guide them.
Yeah. So let's talk about what that means, and I'll get into the start of the presentation. First of all, I'd like to frame this just with FortiGuard Labs. You know, this is our threat intelligence, actionable threat intelligence. It's the heart of our security fabric at Fortinet. You'll see all of our product services. It's all coming from FortiGuard Labs. So There's a lot to talk about there, but today, again, we're going to focus on what you see on the left here, on the trusted partnerships, how we're actually driving innovation in the industry with threat intelligence. That's what this webinar is about. At FortiGuard Labs, we are about starting with visibility. You know, we're getting over 200 billion signals a day coming in that we need to curate, right? We need to contextualize. We need to filter out the signal from the noise. We need to then take that information, innovate on that, you know, using machine learning models, using a security stack, using automation, human-based intelligence with over 500 analysts that we have worldwide, and then making that actionable, right? So there's so many different points of action that we talk about, everything from automation through our UTP, Universal Threat Protection, you know, services that you see on the right, but also the human-based intelligence from research, right? From threat signals or outbreak alerts, threat intelligence briefs, and then of course, actual professional services as well, right? From incident response and MDR and penetration testing and so forth. But another actionable point, because there's so many different ways to action this, is what we're doing in terms of industry. And that's what we're going to talk about today, right? How we're actually actioning this to better the industry, make this readily available for implementation for any SOCs out there, really. When you look at our partnership model with FortiGuard Labs, you know, I've been driving this for well over a decade, close to 15 years. It's different things that we're doing. And again, different subjects, right? When we talk about private to private sector, working with Microsoft Map, working with Dragos on the OT side, Verizon data breach investigation report, Schneider Electric, of course, on the OT side, all of that. Different use cases. We also work with National CERT on infrastructure disruption, right? Trying to find malicious hosting, take that down. Law enforcement, working on the attribution piece of threat intelligence, arresting and prosecuting cybercriminals. Different conversations. Today, we're going to be focused on the industry piece, right? How are we innovating and collaborating in the industry? Different ways to do this. We're doing this through Cyber Threat Alliance, first.org. We're doing this through, you know, even back 10 years ago, helping to actually define and create STIX and TAXI, which are protocols in use today to automate the transport of threat intelligence. What you see in the middle, of course, with MITRE and MITRE Ingenuity is what we're going to be focused on today. So that's just honing in one of the pillars of what we're doing in partnership. So what we're trying to do, and you know, in partnership with MITRE Ingenuity, is changing the rules of the game, right? So Doug talked about IOCs, right? A lot of people, when you talk about threat intelligence, you think of IOCs, you think of IPs, URLs, hashes, and so forth, right? It's not too strategic, right? Those are threat feeds. You can hook up, you can add policies and block to it. That's not what this is about. What we're trying to do is get out of that mentality, that very old school mentality of just reactive, right? Find IOCs, block it. Doug's going to walk through how we're doing that. But what we're trying to do is change the rules of the game, right? We're trying to really innovate in the industry. We're bringing security teams across global geos with MITRE, different sectors. You'll see cross-sector support here through healthcare, financials, operational technology, and so forth. We're really trying to advance the state of the art and then define the state of the practice, right? So creating great ideas, but then really putting pen to paper, the rubber to the road, implementing this, right? It's not just an idea floating around that sounds great, right? Something practical that we can achieve together. FortiGuard Labs and Fortinet, we actually were an early adopter of this. We joined over 2 years ago. And so we've been doing this for 2 years. The projects we're going to walk through today are sightings ecosystem, attack flow, attack workbench, summoning the pyramid. Doug will walk you through those. And what we're trying to do with these projects within MITRE is to define the idea first, right? So we start with the actual projects that we're doing, how we can change the game on the adversary to make it more difficult for them to operate, right? This is a very strategic model that we have. So I'll go to the next slide. Threat-informed defense, it's a long and difficult game. And so you've heard about MITRE ATT&CK, right? With MITRE ATT&CK, there is a defined framework. You have 13 different versions of it now. That's just the what, right? You can define TTPs, tactics, techniques, procedures, what's happening with that. You can then start to understand what's happening, what tools and techniques that attackers and adversaries are using. How are they implementing that? You can then, once you understand that, you can start to operationalize MITRE ATT&CK, right? This is all part of that journey for threat-informed defense. How do you operationalize the TTPs that attackers are using? How do you implement that into your security stack, into your SOC, and then start to have the human expertise that understand this language of MITRE ATT&CK, that can work with it, understand it, see what's happening, and then be able to actually adopt, a defensive standpoint to that. So the whole point here is not building a fortress against an invisible enemy, right? And that's the IOC approach. It's understanding what tools, techniques, procedures, what's the strategy. Think of the game of chess, right? It's a game board. Understanding, yes, we know what MITRE ATT&CK is, but here is how attackers are actually implementing their tools. Here's how it maps up. Now that I understand that, and particular to my sector as an example, how can I operationalize a defense for that? So that's the idea behind the threat-informed defense, right? It's literally what's in the name. It's understanding and building a defense plan by being informed about the adversary behavior. What we're doing with MITRE CTID is taking a unique approach to threat-informed defense R&D. So this is not an ISAC, it's not an ISAO, it's not a sharing relationship, it's not an academic partnership, it's not a consortium or a trade association. It's privately funded research and development center between all of the members within the CTID. And the whole idea of this is not proprietary, right? This is stakeholders getting together to fund, to collaborate on projects. I'll walk you through that process. As those projects come to fruition, they get implemented, they get published, and they become readily available to the industry, right? This is how we're trying to advance the state of the practice. This is not proprietary. This is all about industry adoption and how we can move the needle. Think of MITRE ATT&CK, right? Very similar method, and look how globally adopted that is now. That's just one project. In fact, if you look at MITRE and the CTID, there are over 22 published projects now beyond MITRE ATT&CK. That's what you might not know, right? And these are all revolving around new concepts around operationalizing attack, around threat-informed defense. We have 27 members now within MITRE CTID, 14 ideas in the pipeline. So I'll talk about what that means in a second. And actually 4 active projects in development too. So those are some pretty big numbers, especially considering this was launched, just over 2 years ago. And in fact, if we look at some of the projects, 4 of those 22 published projects, FortiGuard Labs has been hands-on, has been leading and actually implementing our views of threat intelligence on that, which again, Doug will walk you through today. So what we're trying to do again is to advance the state of the art, advance the state of the practice to improve cyber defense at scale. Right? You can't do that by just looking at threat feeds and IOCs, right? You can't do that by just having a reactive approach. You literally have to change that culture and the mentality, how we approach threat intelligence, right? Because again, old school threat intelligence is just relying on those IOCs. We're talking completely about, yes, using MITRE ATT&CK and TTPs, but beyond that, things like, looking at what are the latest CVEs and how are those mapped to attackers, right? What are the capabilities of attackers, right? If I say APT1 or APT 38, what's the difference between them? What are their toolings like? What are the capabilities? What sectors are they known to target? How can I start to build a defense at scale against those APT groups? And what about cybercriminal groups, again, as well, right? Those sorts of things, right? There's all different projects that revolve around that. Into the state of practice, right? So you'll see with these projects as we go along, when we start talking about, yes, here's a good idea, we don't just leave it there. You're going to see, and we've done this, by the way, there's some references which we'll provide from FortiGuard Labs in terms of blogs. When we publish a project, we give practical advice, right? We actually show what this framework looks like, how you can implement implement it. We give models, we adopt those models as well too. We're actually actively doing that with some of the playbooks that we're creating now too. So that's that translation, right? We guide and show how we can actually make it practicable, right? So there's always that mission to transform these into the state of the practice. Just to give you an idea what some of these look like, we have TRAM, which is a threat reporting model. So mapping threat intelligence reports to streamlining this basically into cyber operations. And then you have, in terms of practice, things like the adversary emulation, right? These are just two projects that we think about from the MITRE CTID, looking how you can actually, when we talk about these groups, how can you better emulate these groups into a purple team exercise for breach and attack simulation environments. And again, it's just a snapshot. There's well over 20 of these projects in the IDEA market. We're looking at things like atomic data sources, mapping security controls, right? So again, pen to paper, yes, we know the problem, but when you're speaking TTPs, how does that map to my SOC? How does that map to my security controls? I mentioned mapping CVEs. That's another one. We have Caldera, which is an emulation engine as well too. So again, state of the art, state of the practice, right? And so on the state of the art side, understanding the adversaries, what are their playbooks, what are their latest models, how from a threat intelligence perspective, how can we model what their state of the art is, what's happening on the adversary side, and then of course, how do we map that to improve defenses? It's a ever-changing game, by the way. This is not static. That's why the center is here. There's always new ideas, new projects that we need to adopt, and new versions of these projects as they come out. I'm sure you're familiar with MITRE Attack. There's, as I said, over 12 versions, I believe 13 now that have been implemented. This is all meant to be repeatable, scalable, and agile, right? This is on member-powered collaboration. Again, this isn't just one member leading it. What happens is we, in the center, what we do is we get together and we propose different projects that we want to participate in. We've done this with FortiGuard Labs. We've thrown many ideas into the hat. When there's a bite and there's traction, we get together and there's a handful of members that say, yes, this is a good idea. We want to do this, right? It goes into the funnel. That idea then becomes a reality. And this is how we've been working on this for the past 2 years. We've had 4 of those ideas become realities now, published projects. I'm very excited about it. I think you should find it insightful. Doug will walk through those shortly. And this is not arbitrary, right? I mean, members get to choose what projects they're interested in and move forward with that. Some ideas, of course, never do come to fruition. That's the nature of the game. But again, this is member-powered collaboration, how we can advance state of the art and put that into state of the practice, really. So that's a little bit of framing. Hopefully that's useful what we're doing with the center. We are a research partner now with the MITRE Ingenuity Center for Threat Informed Defense. So what that means is we're essentially working on these projects every quarter now with MITRE. We believe in this mission. This is absolutely needed. I'm sure when you hear about threat intelligence, it's often overwhelming, right? So this is actually trying to simplify that. We can't simplify it without the right tools, without the right frameworks, moving beyond MITRE Attack as well. And so I'll stop there, Doug, and I'll pass it over to you, I think, to get into some of the projects and objectives. I think before we do that, let's open up the polls one last time to the audience. It's an open-ended question, right? Talking about how does your organization balance the cost of implementing a threat intelligence program with the benefits? A lot of the times, it's hard to justify the cost of a threat intelligence platform or a threat intelligence program or an investment into threat intelligence until you have a problem. Oftentimes, we're living in a reactive world, right? So the question here, open-ended, I would really be curious to hear some answers from the audience as to what your approach is that, right? Is it gaining support from the CSO, from the board? Is it about showing visibility? Is it about doing purple team exercises? These are the sorts of answers that we're looking for. And it's not always an easy one. I think the industry is changing, Doug, right?
it's a very difficult one, right? Because first you need to be able to articulate very powerfully why you need this to the upper layers, right? And sometimes even when you're able to do this, they don't have the knowledge to grasp fully what you mean. So it's a very difficult task to achieve for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think now with all the threats we're seeing, ransomware and everything being front and center, it is becoming less of a cost center, right? And more of a fundamental within the fiscal budget. So, okay. Really appreciate your answers. Thank you. So that's the staging. As you can tell, we believe in this a lot. This is a great industry effort. We can't win this war alone. This is how, again, we make it more expensive for adversaries to operate with the proper strategic tooling and approach. I'm very excited about it. And I'll pass it over to Doug now to go through the projects and objectives. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah, so it's very interesting to see how the center is so on point on the needs of every organization when it comes to defending their crown jewels, right? And they are really trying to understand what standards, what tools they're needing, what frameworks, and how to evolve those three specific things in a direction that will enable most organizations to defend, their infrastructure against the threat landscape, which as today has been evolving very rapidly, right? And that's mainly because of the advanced persistent cybercrime now, which is this is a new term that has been coined just because cybercrime has been at it for so long that they are now have the similar capabilities to small nation state APTs like Iran and North Korea. So what they're trying to do is they're moving left on the attack chain, focusing more on reconnaissance and weaponization. So they're trying to understand your defenses better. They're trying to create their own zero-day exploits and using that against your organization, right? That's a huge challenge by itself. And as most of us on the industry have been made aware of, ChatGPT is being, and large language models as a whole has been used extensively both for generative processes, right? Like finding vulnerabilities in code, writing code, malicious code specifically for stealing information, encrypting files. So we see these two major forces colliding and being a major challenge when it comes to securing your infrastructure, right? That coupled with the convergence of network and security, right, with the security-driven networking and the consolidation of security point products, which if you've been trying to secure your organization for over 20 years and adopting technologies as soon as they were available, you might end up with a cybersecurity platform that has a lot of different vendors and that relies on APIs to connect specific things from the network to the endpoint to the cloud, which will ultimately lead to a porous, or to a perforated attack surface, right? One that will be tasked with the challenge of defending against this specific advanced persistent cybercrime and advanced persistent threats from nation states that are coming with you at full force right now, obviously using the weaponization of AI to breach your defenses, move laterally, go after your crown jewels and exfiltrate that information without your security technology being able to defend against it. So that's why the center is doing what it's doing. It is doing the work to develop new standards, develop new tools, continuously improve the MITRE attack framework with new techniques, new procedures that have been found on the wild just so that you have all the information that you need and all the tools that you need to quickly grasp how that threat landscape is shifting, how that relates to your environment, to your industry, to your region, and using that information to meticulously understand where your gaps are, right? So this is the main objective of the center. And we're putting out constantly information on those breaking threats as they are mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and from our outbreaks. You can see them on FortiGuard.com. And the main use for that is to break the attack sequence, right? So you can see now is the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right? On the very left-hand side, you have the recon phase, then the weaponization all the way through action. So it comes without saying that if you break that attack sequence down to the left, it's better because you have more information about the attack. You're gonna have more time, you know, and you can plan accordingly to where you're gonna break that attack sequence. I'm not sure, just moving away a little bit from the MITRE specifically, our threat landscape report showed that our incident responders from the cases that I worked on the wild, a little over 40% was because of stolen credentials, right? So if you had your credentials stolen and they are for sale on the deep and dark web, you'll be able to have that with the FortiRecon. Just an example. Okay, so jumping into the projects specifically, it's been my pleasure to be one of the first contributors to this project. We have Sightings Ecosystem 1 and 2 now. And why did we come up with this project, right? Because most of the times when you're trying to operationalize MITRE ATT&CK framework, it does solve a lot of problems, as Derek covered briefly earlier on this webinar. You're shifting away from using IOCs to using what we call IOAs, which is indicator of actions. But even so, when you're looking at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it has 14 tactics and more than 500 techniques. And each of those specific techniques can have kind of like almost an infinite amount of ways to proceduralize each one of the techniques. And the framework itself, meaning that new tactics come along, right? So it's an ever-growing corpus of techniques and procedures on this framework. So the Sightings ecosystem tried to get information from all of the vendors that are participating in this project according to their detection capabilities of techniques. So different vendors have EDRs, they have sandboxes, they have network monitoring tools, CMs. So those specific vendors were collaborating with the techniques that they were seeing on the wild according to their own detection capabilities. It comes without saying that different products from different vendors implement MITRE ATT&CK framework at different paces because this framework evolves pretty much every 6 months. So it was the job of the center to aggregate all of those sightings of techniques into a report so that you, our customer, could have information on how to prioritize your threat-informed defense. Okay, I have 500 techniques, but what do most attacks are using, right? So let's say 90% of the attacks are using these 15 techniques. So you have a very curated, high-resolution threat report that will guide you in your purple teaming exercise, in your threat hunting, okay? So over the course of a few months, they've collected 6 million sightings that led to 1.1 million normalized sightings across 184 techniques. And that provided a picture of common adversary behaviors, right? So which techniques are adversaries using, how their use changing over time, and how they're chaining techniques together, how they are using those techniques together, if they're dependent on the execution on a specific technique to get to another one, how does that looks like, right? So the first report was already published and it's open source. It's out there on the web. I think it's under assets after this webinar ends. You guys will have access to the report. It's online. You guys can look at it. So the report showed that there's 15 techniques that make the majority of the attacks. So if you want to start operationalizing MITRE attack and you are absolutely overwhelmed by the 500 different techniques, you can start focusing on these ones, and you have the most return on investment on this specific front, right? So you have the top 15 techniques as schedule job, command and scripting interpreter with CMD.exe and PowerShell and others, right? So it's a very interesting thing. The other one is attack flow. So if you're familiar with the MITRE attack framework, you understand that specific threat actor and campaign profiles, they are expressed atomically, meaning there's no relationship between them. So the attack flow wanted to add another dimension to this data, right? So as security vendors and law enforcement organizations and everyone who's at the job of trying to profile threat actor campaigns in our families, as we're doing this over time, we started to notice that some of the profiles were starting to overlap. So attack flow creates a linkage between the techniques so we could further differentiate them, and introduces a few concepts, right? So we have property, an asset, which can be like a database or a system, a relationship between a system, an asset, and an action, and a property of that specific asset. So it tries to graphically express how does that an attack unfold. And the vision for this is that, like, within 10 years, when EDR solutions, sandbox solutions, really incorporate this framework and are expressing that standard in their threat intelligence, that you have specific flows of attacks coming into your organization, and you'll be able to say, okay, so I have a few attacks that are just, payloads that do DDoS and will overflow my link. I have attacks that are after my computing resources, but I have attacks that are actually stealing information from my company. And you'll be able to prioritize accordingly, given other telemetries from the network, other assets that you have, and your own specific posture, security posture.
And,
so that's
and I think, Doug, I think the other interesting thing here too, so if we think of the sightings ecosystem, which you talked about first, that's really the what is happening. It's a heat map, essentially, right? So it's showing that, these adversaries in these sectors, in these regions, are using these top techniques. This is their preferred weapon of choice, right? The interesting thing about attack flow, and personally, I think, is what you see on the right, the asset mapping, because this really translates that state of practice, how you operationalize this to defense. So think of, I'm sure a lot of the viewers are familiar with the term playbook, right? What is a playbook? You have defensive playbooks, which are in, like, we have it in FortiSOAR as an example, right? Where you can automate defensive posture and response. But you have the adversarial playbook as well, which is what are the attackers up to? And most current adversarial playbooks are really just the static mappings, right? They're talking about capabilities, things that have been observed in the past. What this is really doing with attack flow is taking that to the next level, right? It's saying here is, a cybercrime group, like, let's say Rebel or an APT group, doesn't matter what it is. Here are all the different instances that we've seen them attack, and in those attacks, here's how they've moved, right? We know the kill chain, right? How do they get from point A to point B? Just like the game of chess, there's more than one way to make the move. But actually, when we look at this, the attackers are often, it's classic human behavior, right? The attackers are following familiar paths. If they're successful once, they're going to do it again, and that's what we're observing already in early indications. But I think one of the cool things here, Doug, is the asset, right? So it's taking this, zooming in with the microscope, saying, not only this is how they're going from point A to point B, but they're doing it by by attacking these assets, whether it's a database or what have you. So yeah, I think it's an important part to call out on the assets.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, and once you start building corpus of attack flows of different specific threat actors and campaigns, then you're going to be able to extract what they're really after throughout major campaigns, right? Which is a very good, interesting thing to have, right? For sure. So another project that it's still ongoing, so we don't have to talk. We can't talk too much over it, but it tries to score analytics, right? So once you have security products that are tasked with the challenge of identifying specific techniques over network traffic, over logs, or over endpoint behavior, you have a specific set of, let's say, Sigma rules or EDR hunting rules that are based on specific things that are found on different layers of the pyramid of pain, right? So as you move up the pyramid, it gets harder to detect and easier to evade, right? So this specific project, the Summiting the Pyramid, is trying to come up with a way to score those analytics according to how easier they are to evade and how much work one will have to do in order to implement it. So when you're looking at, let's say, a Sigma rule, right? It's written there. Okay, so try to see specifically if a PowerShell command has this specific process string. It ends it, which starts with, but that's a lot of on the user environment here, right? So it can be easily evaded if someone is using a different process name, right? So as you move up the pyramid, right, you're getting closer to the low-level execution of specific API calls, and that's obviously going to be way harder to evade, but at the same time, it's going to be more computationally expensive for you to keep monitoring those specific things, right? So the project's trying to hone in to at which level most analytics should be focusing on to get the most detection. So, okay, if we're looking at syscalls, if we're looking at the operating system, how much of a performance impact will that incur? And what's the security effectiveness of running specific analytics at that level? So that's what we're trying to do. Another very interesting and near and dear to my heart is Workbench 2, which is basically a portal in which you can continuously update new MITRE attack versions and maintain your own knowledge base. So let's say you have a threat intelligence team, and on that threat intelligence team, you're looking at the malwares that are hitting your organization. You are actually extracting those malwares. You have a reversing engineering team. That reversing engineering team is going after the malwares and trying to reverse them and expressing the threat intelligence that they were able to extract when analyzing that malware, either in a sandbox environment or some manual analysis, and you're putting that information on the attack workbench. That information can then be used by other teams in your environment. Let's say the threat hunting team, the threat analytics and intelligence team, so they could understand specifically what techniques are adversaries trying to use against you and how you can leverage that in your environment. That specific project for a security vendor is super valuable because it helps to break down silos. So if let's say Fortinet has their own reverse engineering team, they're working on that. They can, and they reverse a lot of samples a day. We have a huge reverse engineering team, and we have automated tools to do that. We capture the threat intelligence from those specific malicious payloads. We put it on Workbench, and then our EDR team or sandbox team can work on new techniques as we're seeing as fast as we can, right? So it's an open source tool right now. The Workbench version 1 has already been released, and it's out there, so you guys can feel free to operationalize this in your environment and use it to improve the flow of threat intelligence within your organization, right? So it will, the way we see this is that this will drastically reduce the barriers for defenders to ensure that their threat intelligence is also aligned with the public attack knowledge base and quickly facilitate the flow of threat intelligence information between teams in an organization. So, so as I told you guys, yeah, we're working on Workbench version 2 right now. It's going to have a few more features. We're evolving the platform as I told you guys, but the Workbench in general, as I told you, enable cross-team sharing of cyber threat intelligence. Right? It allows you to collaborate and take notes on techniques, groupers, and other objects. You know, it allows you to keep your knowledge base with new mappings as soon as new threat reports are released from the MITRE attack framework. It allows you to do defensive planning, right? So as new threats are hitting your environment, so this is very interesting because even though you have, okay, I have an antivirus, I have a FortiSandbox, looking at the logs is not enough, right? So, okay, these threats were stopped. Okay, these ones were stopped, but if the threat actor is really keen at breaching your environment, those might be stopped, but as he applies new evasions and new techniques, that might go through. And if that goes through, are you capable of hunting in your environment for that? So the most interesting and fruitful conversations I have with customers were when they were actually looking at their own threat intelligence and doing something with that. So you need threat intelligence from vendors and from other, but there's threat intelligence hitting you. There are sandbox logs. From the sandbox logs, you have hashes. From the hashes, you can have the file. There's a lot of things you can do, right, with your own threat intelligence. Also, red teaming, tracking and manage coverage of red teaming engagements in the same way you track attack coverage. And you can collaborate with the attack community. If you have a reverse engineering team, you might run into a new implementation of a technique, a new procedure of how to do things differently. And then it enables you to collaborate not only within your organization, but with the attack community itself. So it's a very powerful project. I'm really excited for this one. So I think we're almost up on time. I would like to ask you guys, how would you rate today's presentation? And feel free to submit your response.
Thank you, Douglas. Yeah, we're right up on time. We scheduled about 45 minutes. We did want to keep it open for I see there's been an active chat in Q&A, so thank you for the questions. I've been going through answering those as they have come in. Of course, these questions might come up after the fact, so please do feel free to put any questions in now. And we'll be happy to answer those as well too. We'll just wait a minute for some of those to come in. And as Douglas said, if you can kindly rate today's presentation, that would be much appreciated. Also, as far as the assets are concerned, as I said, this isn't proprietary, right? The whole idea of these is to make this available to the public. So we will be providing links as to where you can find this. From MITRE site as an example. These projects do, when they're published, they are made freely available on GitHub as well too. So that's a big point to make, and we'll certainly guide you to that as well too. Okay, I see a question coming in here. So how can Fortinet help if we don't have a dedicated security team? Great question. I see this come up all the time. In fact, it's quite common. So various ways. As I said, these implementations we are doing. So this is where FortiGuard Labs comes into play. We are automating all of that innovation and processing that we're doing, visibility, the work from threat-informed defense, and trying to make it more simple to the end user, right? So we do this in a variety of ways. So first of all, of course, is through our fabric, right? Integration with the fabric, FortiGuard Labs. We have things like NDR, network detection response, SOAR, SIM and SOAR, which plug into a SOC to be able to understand threat events, to be able to automate and orchestrate that. So you don't have to have the human headcount. in the SOC doing that. We do also have SOC as a service, right, as well. So it's a managed SOC essentially, exactly what that's designed for, right? If you don't have a SOC of your own and you don't want to hire it, you don't have an OPEX headcount budget in mind to hire 5 or 10 analysts, you don't have to do that. Again, with things that we're observing through the managed SOC on the network, we're able to respond to that as well too. So variety of ways. I guess my point is, again, we're actually simplifying this, right? If you look at a lot of security environments, the problem in the industry, Doug had a slide on that, on the consolidation and convergence. There's like 15, 20 different point solutions that have, some are dinosaurs, right, that have been sitting in these security stacks for years. There's an industry movement now to consolidate these more and to converge. And we also integrate with that. We have a fabric-ready ecosystem, so we have partners. In fact, over 350 partners, 500 products, third-party products that we integrate with as well. So that's all part of that seamless journey to make it easier, without you having to have a dedicated security team.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions here?
Okay, that was quite a few questions that came in. So really wanted to thank you again for your time in viewing this this webinar. Again, this is something that's, it's been 2 years in the development, but you probably are just hearing about this now, and very glad to share our thoughts on it. And you will be hearing more about this. There's a lot of participation, as I said earlier, over 25, 27 members within the CTID. So there's a lot happening. We'll bring you certainly more updates as we proceed with these projects. As Doug said, there's a couple already in motion, and more to come. And so you'll be hearing a lot more about that and how we're trying to advance the state of the art and the state of the practice. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks, Doug. Really appreciate your time as well.
No worries.